Um, just, I'm trying to be pretty relaxed here, if that's okay with you. It's towards the end of Shabbat. I love public speaking, and a friend of mine is the driving force for the last 2 years now behind the idea of a New Mexico Jewish History Museum. She really wants there to be a New Mexico Jewish History Museum, and the idea is to promote Judaism in a positive light, to tell people what role Jews have played in New Mexico. And so I connected her with a few people that I thought might be able to help her get this off the ground. And she was very appreciative. They wanted to do a promotional video for this. And she said, thank you so much for helping me make some connections. And I said, well, there's a cost. And she said, oh, what's the cost? I said, I'd love to narrate the video. You're going to make this video. She said, oh, that's a great idea, because we hadn't figured out what we were going to do about that. So I narrated this video. We now have this promotional video for a not yet existent New Mexico Jewish History Museum. And for a few years, I've been interested. I retired from Los Alamos National Laboratory a few years ago, and I was trying to think, well, what am I going to do to fill my time? And a few years ago, I wrote to an organization called the Jewish Braille Institute to see if I could read books, narrate books for the Jewish Braille Institute. And they said, we only use people who are in the New York area, sorry. So then I did this video, I don't know, 4 months ago or so. And I thought, let me try again. So I wrote to the Jewish Braille Institute again. And this time the guy said, well, normally we only use volunteers in the New York area, but send me something if you've got something, and I'll let you know. So I sent him this video that I had narrated, and I was really, really pleased. I think it's probably a different person now who wrote back, but he wrote back like within 4 milliseconds and said, great, sounds great. I'm going to send you a special microphone. They use these special microphones. So they have this, it's like a hard drive. So it records on the microphone. You connect it to your computer, and then you upload the file to the Jewish Braille Institute. So Beverly, this is what reminded me of this. Beverly made a sign, and it says recording in progress. So I put it at the top of the stairs to the basement, which is where my office is, so that she doesn't come down. So I'm not like reading a book and now we can't record it. So I'm about 2/3 of the way through a book called The Goldberg, the Great Goldbergs, The Great Goldbergs. I don't know that you want to run out and buy the book right now. And I don't know how it's going to end, because I'm only 2/3 of the way through it, but I've been recording chapter by chapter. And then I upload the chapters and send them to this guy at the Jewish Braille Institute, and he edits them. He tells me, you've got to redo this line or whatever. It's a very interesting experience. I'm really having fun with it. So I'm hoping to continue doing that. Anyway, so the recording in progress is part of what I do now. So I think we should probably get started. I haven't seen, there we go. So I haven't seen all of you, I don't think, on this visit. This is Beverly and I, this is my wife, Beverly. We think that this is the 4th time that we've come to Cheyenne over probably the last more than a decade. We live in Los Alamos, New Mexico, so it's about an 8-hour drive, I think, from here. We chose not to drive this time because that's a bit much for a quick trip. But
Raton is not the best to go over.
Raton is not the best this time of year. You're absolutely right. So we have been privileged to connect with people from this congregation on a handful of times over the last several years. And I have to say, I'm deeply honored to be here for this weekend. And I hope that there will be ample time if people have questions that they want to ask or want to talk about things. I'm happy because I'm here and I'm at your service. One of the things that we talked about in setting up this weekend was me giving a presentation of some kind. And this is not a slideshow presentation. If we were going to do something probably outside of Shabbat, we would have pushed to do some kind of a slideshow presentation. I'll tell you that I have these things ready to go if anybody ever wants me to come back. I have a presentation about the Jewish scientists of the Manhattan Project. So Los Alamos, as you probably know, was a town that was created in 1943 where no town existed in northern New Mexico. And it was created specifically for the design of the first atomic bomb. And I discovered almost by accident that many of the scientists who were the leaders of the successful project to develop the first atomic bomb happened to be Jewish. So I have a talk about the Jewish scientists of the Manhattan Project. And then kind of a spin-off of that one, I have a talk that I put together a few years ago just before the movie Oppenheimer came out. How many of you saw the movie Oppenheimer? Wow, okay, quite a few. So in Los Alamos, as you might imagine, when we knew that film was going to come out, there was a big to-do. Part of that film was made in Los Alamos. We don't have film crews show up in town all that often, like never. And so it was very exciting to have that take place. So we knew the film was coming out. There's an organization in Los Alamos called the J. Robert Oppenheimer Memorial Committee, and they wanted to do a series of talks in conjunction with the release of the film. So I got asked if I would do a talk. I am the only rabbi in Los Alamos, so I was asked if I would do a talk about the fact that Oppenheimer was Jewish. And I thought that was maybe not so interesting a topic because his connection to his Judaism was pretty thin. But I knew about Louis Strauss, who was also Jewish, and I knew that there was conflict between the two of them. So I put together this talk that was basically the Jewish dimension of the conflict between Strauss and Oppenheimer. This is before the film was released, so nobody knew what the film was really going to be about. And I gave this talk a week and a half before the film was released, and it was recorded and it was uploaded. And then the film came out, and it turns out that Louis Strauss was a major character in the movie. And so people would Google like Louis Strauss Oppenheimer, and if they had a Jewish connection, they put the word Jewish in, and my name came up because I had just done this talk. So I got interviewed by Israel 24 television. It was picked up by the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. I had like my Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame. It was pretty funny, but it's an interesting talk too. So for another time, I've got a slideshow about the Jewish dimension between in the conflict between Strauss and Oppenheimer. But let me back up now, because I want to tell you about my own personal trajectory. I wanted to be a scientist from the age of 4. I was given, I believe that when I was 4, I got a telescope as a Hanukkah present. I mean, I was so committed to becoming a scientist that because I grew up in the age of the Sputnik challenge and in the age of science being really promoted in this country. So I really wanted to be a scientist. And my family belonged to a conservative synagogue, and I attended and went, like 2 days a week after school, and Saturday morning services and Sunday program as well. So we got a very strong grounding in Jewish skills, I would call it. So reading Hebrew, chanting prayers, things like that. Not a lot of what I would call the substance of Judaism, but a lot on the mechanics of Judaism. So I was pretty well versed in that. And I love to sing. So I used to do a lot of the singing of the prayers as a child. We had children's services every Saturday morning, and week after week, different classes would lead services. And when our class would lead, I would usually lead many of the prayers. I became bar mitzvah at the age of 13. And just to be very clear, if you are Jewish, you become bar or bat mitzvah when you hit a certain age. You may not choose to celebrate that occasion in a synagogue. You may go to a baseball game or whatever. You still become bar and bat mitzvah. I try to make that point very clear to people, because oftentimes somebody who didn't go through a ceremony feels a bit second-class citizen. It's a mistake, and people become bar and bat mitzvah. They don't have a bar and bat mitzvah. They have a bar and bat mitzvah celebration, perhaps. But anyway, I went through the normal trajectory that I hit 13. I actually led most of the worship service, and you'll appreciate this. We did a real conservative service. I led Shacharit, the morning service. My older brother led Musaf. There was no clergy really involved in the service to speak of, though it was held in the regular sanctuary of the synagogue. And the next day was probably the beginning of my non-involvement in formal Jewish activities. I mean, I still lived at home. We would go on high holidays to the synagogue. We would have a Seder at home, very minimal Jewish practice. At the age of 17, I went off to Caltech. And why did I pick Caltech? First of all, I believe I can say this totally objectively. It's the premier physics institution in the country for training physicists, at least, in my day, long ago. And also, I grew up in Chicago. So I took a map of the United States. I applied to the University of Illinois because it's a state school and I knew I could get in there. I applied to MIT and I applied to Caltech. That's all I could afford to apply for, those three schools. And then after getting accepted at all three schools, I took a map of the United States. I saw Chicago, I saw Boston, and I saw Pasadena. And I said, Pasadena's further away from Chicago than Boston. I'm going to Caltech. But also because that was the era of Richard Feynman, and I'm going to come back and talk about him as well in some detail. How many of you have heard of Richard Feynman, the physicist? Quite a few. Okay, so I'm going to talk about him in some detail. He was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He actually was a group leader at Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project era from 1943 to 1945. He had just gotten his PhD when he showed up at Caltech, at Los Alamos, and was, I think he was 25 when he showed up at Los Alamos, and was a group leader. So that's pretty impressive. And he went on to win the Nobel Prize in 1965, so well after the war. And he spent almost his entire academic career at Caltech. And when I was at Caltech was the heyday of Feynman's, semi-godlike status at Caltech. He had won the prize in 65. I was there in 71 through 75. So I went, from age 13.01 through my Caltech years, not really going to a synagogue at all. not knowing much about Judaism, in all honesty, other than sort of the mechanics of Judaism. I left Caltech when I graduated in 1975 and worked that summer at JPL. And I became a graduate student in physics at the University of California in San Diego. And I had specifically chosen that institution because I wanted to go into a branch of physics called plasma physics. And in particular, I wanted to apply my skills to working on a very challenging physics problem called controlled magnetic fusion. Controlled magnetic fusion is a way to make energy out of a very ubiquitous energy source, namely water, and it could be a game changer for the world. But it is a super hard problem. And not only is it a challenging problem, but it has implications for the world, for making the world a better place. And that was something that I thought I would like to do, combine my interest in physics with an interest in making the world a better place. And there was a guy at UC San Diego who was doing some very interesting plasma physics work, and I decided I wanted to go, and I wanted to be a graduate student of that particular guy. So I showed up at UC San Diego in 1975. I worked for 4 years with this thesis advisor on a project. And the project was, a very difficult physics measurement. And at the end of 4 years of hard work, I can show you the results that we got. That's the result. We got no results, right? So we had made this measurement and you couldn't see any signal above the noise. That's not good. It's hard to write a thesis with no data. So my thesis advisor said, you know, we could put in a grant for a more powerful laser to try this measurement again and see if we can see some signal above the noise. But frankly, I don't know that it's worth it. I think we want to change direction altogether. I have this idea for a different experiment. And there's a guy at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Actually, then it was called Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory. I have a friend at Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory who is doing this interesting experiment. Why don't you go for this summer and learn what he's doing, come back to San Diego. We'll build an experiment sort of like what that guy has, and you'll do your thesis on that experiment. So I didn't know anything about Los Alamos. I'd probably never set foot in New Mexico before. So I drove out from San Diego to Los Alamos and showed up in Los Alamos not knowing a single person in town. It's a pretty scary thing. You know, I was a 25-year-old single person, didn't know anybody in Los Alamos. And I thought, I could go to the synagogue. There's probably, you know, some people I could meet at the synagogue. It was a life-changing experience to show up at the synagogue in Los Alamos, which is not completely unlike the synagogue here in Cheyenne. It's the only game in town. It's a small town. Los Alamos quite a bit smaller than Cheyenne, but it's a single synagogue and it has to somehow accommodate all the Jews in town. So I showed up there, not knowing anybody. And because I could sing, people said, please keep coming back. Because, and I say this, it's now going to be recorded, I'll get in trouble for it, but there's something generally true that scientists and singing do not go well together. And so when I'm not there in Los Alamos, the singing is a bit shaky, shall we say. So people encouraged me to come back. And I started going regularly to the synagogue in Los Alamos. But now, at the age of 25, I realized that everything that I thought I knew about Judaism was probably incomplete at best. I thought Judaism was pretty childish because what I knew was stuff I had been taught when I was a child. Nobody actually ever said, there's a lot more to it than this, but you're probably not ready to learn it yet. And so I stayed at Los Alamos. So I should finish that piece of the trajectory. I was there for the summer. I worked on this experiment in the summer of 1979. I worked on this experiment in Los Alamos for the summer. And as the summer was drawing to a close, I realized, this is interesting. I showed up here, and on day one, I was taking data on a working experiment. And I was making measurements, and I could design, modify the experiment and do particular studies. And because it was a fairly small experiment, and it was just my boss and me and a technician, that it's a very small, scale thing. My boss, who was a great guy, he just said, why don't you take over and just run stuff? So I was doing my own studies on this working experiment with this technician, and the summer was drawing to a close, and the thought of going back to San Diego and building one of these things, which would probably take 2 or 3 years, and then starting to take data. And my parents, would call every so often and say, so when do you think you're going to be done with your PhD? It's like, I hated that question because you don't know when you're going to finish a PhD, right? You'll finish when you're done. So I talked to the guys at Los Alamos and I said, what's the possibility that I could stay beyond the summer and actually work on my thesis here? And they said, that sounds good. I mean, you're doing good stuff. That all worked. My thesis advisor said, that might be okay. It turns out he put in for a grant and didn't get the funding. So if I had gone back, it would have been very complicated anyway. So I stayed in Los Alamos and I worked for the next 2.5 years as a graduate student in Los Alamos. One of very few graduate students who were actually doing their PhD theses in Los Alamos, but I was still a student of UC San Diego. And all those 2.5 years, I continued going to the synagogue in Los Alamos, which is called the Los Alamos Jewish Center, but it's a synagogue, and doing more and more, and leading services, and we had a rabbi in Santa Fe who would come up every so often and teach a class, an adult education Jewish class, right? He exposed me to the Talmud, he exposed me to Midrash, he exposed me to responsa, all these different categories of Jewish texts that I fell in love with. I thought, this is really interesting. Nobody ever told me anything about this stuff. So at the end of about 2.5 years in Los Alamos, I completed my thesis. The guy I was working for in Los Alamos was an added member of my thesis committee. He and I both went back to San Diego where I defended my thesis. And this is like the days of payphones, right? This is 1982. I successfully defended my thesis on a Friday afternoon. This guy who I worked for in Los Alamos went out into the hallway and he called Harry Dreiser, who passed away last night. He called my division leader. He said, Jack successfully defended his thesis, make him a staff member. And from Friday afternoon to Monday, I went from being a graduate student to being a staff member. No postdoc, no wandering around looking for jobs. My salary tripled over the weekend. That hasn't ever happened other than that one time, sadly. But it was really amazing. And so then I was a staff member at Los Alamos and I continued working at the lab. But now with a PhD in physics, they hand you, when you get your PhD in physics, this is a secret. You're not supposed to know this unless you have a PhD in physics, but I'm going to let you in on it. They hand you, with your PhD, an arrogance card. And it says, you are a PhD in physics, you can learn anything. How hard can it be? I mean, you just got your PhD in physics, right? So I started really getting engaged with Jewish study. And I found that it was quite intellectually stimulating. It didn't violate my understanding of the world. It didn't violate my my feeling that there's some huge separation between science and religion. I just treated Judaism sort of like an academic discipline and got all into it. And like I say, there's this rabbi in Santa Fe who used to come up occasionally. He sponsored me to go to an intensive program. He was ordained in the Reform movement. And through the Reform movement, I went to this intensive program for people who were lay leaders in communities that didn't have rabbis or were helping do a lot of leadership in communities, even if there was a rabbi. So I went to that intensive program that was actually extremely stimulating for me, and it helped me calibrate that what I had been learning on my own was pretty good. I was able to figure out, what are the things that you really need to learn. So I went through that thing. And then somehow I got it into my head that what I really wanted to do was to get ordained as a rabbi. Why? It turns out you don't need to be a rabbi. Rabbi literally means teacher, and a community can have lay leadership without anybody ordained and function perfectly well. You can conduct life cycle ceremonies. You don't need to be a rabbi. The one thing I couldn't do, I will tell you, in the early 90s, and I was doing a lot of lay leadership in Los Alamos at the time, I could not conduct a wedding ceremony because the state wouldn't recognize that I had the power to conduct a wedding ceremony. So I found a workaround, which was quite interesting. A friend of mine who was kind of politically connected in Los Alamos, he knew the municipal court judge in Los Alamos. And he asked the judge, he told me, why don't you try calling the municipal court judge? Maybe the guy can help you out. So I called the municipal court judge and I said, I'm interested in being able to conduct wedding ceremonies in Los Alamos. And I understand there's such a thing as an alternate judge of the municipal court. And this guy, Marty Holland, he said, well, it's true. I could have you appointed as an alternate judge of the municipal court, and then you could actually conduct wedding ceremonies in Los Alamos County. They would be recognized by the state. However, I need an alternate judge of the municipal court. So this is going to be a deal. You come and help judge in the municipal court, and I'll get you assigned as an alternate judge. So for 7 years, I was an alternate judge for the Los Alamos Municipal Court. I studied it just like I studied physics and Judaism. I immersed myself in the text, which is the county code. And what would happen is, and this guy was a scientist working at the laboratory also. It was a part-time thing for him to be the municipal court judge. He had been elected, but for me, I was appointed as an alternate. But the way it worked is that Thursday evenings, they would hold court to make it convenient for people. And you came in and you pled, guilty, not guilty, or no contest. If you pled guilty or no contest, the judge would deal with it right on the spot. So I went week after week on Thursday night. I gauged myself in kind of a practice mode. He was the judge. I just sat there and listened. And I would say, okay, this is what I think I would do in this case. This is what I think I would do in this case. I'm too harsh, I'm too lenient, whatever, and I gauged myself so that I could model my behavior on his. And then after several months, he said, I've got to be on travel on Thursday night, you're up. So there I was with my robe on, walking into the courtroom. The bailiff says, all rise for Judge Jack Shlachter, and that was it. So mostly it dealt with things like traffic violations and stuff like that, but with particularly like with the DWI, there were jail sentences that were issued by the court, and so I sent people to jail. Why do I mention that? Because it actually was beneficial to my career at the laboratory later on. I applied. This is probably in the late 90s now. I applied to be deputy group leader of one of the groups, a physics group, an experimental physics group. And the group leader had two candidates that he was interested in testing. This is of value for you as you look at candidates for rabbis, right? You can keep this idea in mind. He had the two of us together, the two candidates, in front of the whole group, and he let the group ask whatever questions they wanted. So, and then he listened to how you responded and what you said. So one person said, I hear that you're not much of a disciplinarian. How do you deal with issues, that come up in the lab? And I said, well, I don't know. I've sent people to jail. So that actually was a good answer. I could say that. Anyway, I was working at the lab, continuing the lab. I did not want to go back to graduate school. I had done that already once. And really, to become an ordained rabbi through an academic institution is probably another 4 years plus of giving up the rest of your life and being like a graduate student again. I didn't think I could do that all over again. So I never went to a seminary. I tried a few different routes. Today it's a lot easier because there's a lot more opportunity, online and with various other programs. But at the time, what I did was just try to get in touch with people and see what I could do to become a rabbi. The reason I wanted to become known as a rabbi was not to support the Jewish community of Los Alamos. That I could do perfectly well as a lay leader. There was no reason to become a rabbi from the perspective internally of the Jewish community in Los Alamos. It was the external thing I was concerned about. How to have the status to stand up to other clergy and to represent the Jewish community with some degree of authority. I thought that being a rabbi would help that and would help the community out. That was really reason number one. Reason number two is that my kids were fairly young, and I wanted to make the statement to my kids that Judaism is important to me, important enough that I want to take a leadership role with some formality. So after a few false starts, it was fortuitous that a letter came to the Los Alamos Jewish Center from a rabbi whose name was Gershon Winkler. Gershon Winkler was at the time a rabbi in West Virginia, but he had decided that he was becoming interested in kind of the outdoors and connection of Judaism to the natural world, and he wanted to move to the Rocky Mountain area. So he wrote to all the congregations up and down the Rocky Mountains to see where might he be able to move that would be interesting. And he wrote to the Los Alamos Jewish Center, and the form letter said, I want to move out, I want to do a scouting trip, and would you be interested in inviting me for rabbi in residence for a weekend or give a talk or whatever? So the Los Alamos Jewish Center responded and said, we'd like to have you come for a Shabbat weekend, not unlike the visit of Beverly and me this weekend. So he came and he led a Friday night service. He led a Saturday morning service. He gave a talk on Saturday afternoon. He probably did Havdalah. While he was there, I talked to him and I said, if you move out to this area, would you take me on as a private student? And he said yes. And within a year, he had moved to the tiniest town in New Mexico. He lived in La Jara, New Mexico, which is a suburb of Cuba, New Mexico. I mean, we're talking 6 sheep and a goat. But he supported himself by writing, and it didn't matter where he lived. And so he moved out to La Jara, New Mexico, and he took me on as a private student. And I did my ordination through him. I'll give you a sample of the way his teaching worked, and for me, it was a wonderful fit. He's very, very knowledgeable. His original smicha, his original ordination, is an Orthodox ordination. He's like the 18th generation rabbi. You know, his family is steeped in all that tradition, but he himself has gone a different direction. He developed what he calls flexidoxy. It's not orthodoxy, it's flexidoxy. And I really subscribe to that. The idea is to know what the tradition says, but to be flexible enough to adapt it to the conditions at hand. I really like that. So he took me on as a student, and an example of what he had as a problem is traditionally during the holiday of Sukkot, which is a 7-day holiday, we take the lulav and the etrog, and we actually call it taking the lulav and the etrog. And what we do is we do sort of this ritual of shaking these objects. It's a palm branch and this thing that looks like an oversized lemon. And we go through this ritual with these things. And that's one of the main mitzvahs, one of the main commandments of the holiday of Sukkot. The only day of Sukkot that you don't take the lulav and the etrog is Shabbat. However, you happen to be in a town where there's only one lulav and etrog. It's at the synagogue, and the only time the people are going to be at the synagogue is on Shabbat. So how do you deal with that situation? Traditionally, you would say, we don't take the lulav and etrog, it's Shabbat. But you're trying to encourage Jewish practice, and is there a way to say you can take the lulav and etrog, maybe you modify things a little bit, but let's figure this out. And then he would say, write a paper for me on how you would deal with the situation of taking the lulav and etrog in a community that is only going to show up on Shabbat, and that's the only time they have. So that's how it worked.
Actually, a situation that's relevant to here.
What a surprise.
And the way we did it was we gathered for Shabbat to have a Shabbat Sukkot dinner, and before sundown, we went out and took the lulav, and we had a meal. So we had a meal together in our sukkah. And then we had a modified Shabbat service here. So,
When I first started here, we went out after Friday night service. We went out after Saturday morning.
So you see how there's some tension with this, right? You can understand that it's not so easy.
I'll talk about this year. I understand what you're saying.
Here's Rabbi Winkler said, it's very easy to be the rabbi who says no. People say, Rabbi, can we? And before they finish the sentence, the answer is no, right? That's the easy way to be a rabbi, the rabbi who says no. And he pushed me to figure out how to say yes within the tradition. It's also easy to just say yes without any thinking. But the hardest thing, and maybe the most satisfying, is to be able to say yes with some basis for the yes. That's what he really worked on. And so I give you this example because I think it really typifies what his approach to Judaism was and what he wanted me to understand. He also said, and I thought this was quite interesting, if you go chronologically with sources, the closer you get to modern times, the more rigid the sources tend to be. And so don't start by looking at what's the most recent statement on this problem. Go back, see how it used to be done. And you brought this up today, right? That we used to not use weapons on Shabbat. And our enemies knew that we didn't use weapons on Shabbat. And guess what? They took advantage of that. So you modify it because the circumstances require it. And the Maccabees said, guys, we're going to take weapons on Shabbat because we need to win. This is not like we're going to be sitting ducks. We're here today because Jews have recognized that tradition sometimes binds you in a way that is not long-term beneficial. Okay.
Think of shofar on Shabbat.
Shofar on Shabbat, it's another example. Absolutely. I mean, it's the only time people could hear the shofar. They're only going to come one day. It's going to be Shabbat. Traditionally, you wouldn't use the shofar. How do you deal with that situation, right? And look, there are plenty of situations like that. And Jews mislead themselves to believe that there's no flexibility. We've never changed. This is the way we've always done it. And that's really not a complete picture of how this works. Okay, I want to come up for air for a moment. So I actually have some notes here. I wanted to start with this joke. A physicist and a rabbi walk into a bar and he orders a drink. That's okay. So that the idea is, right? That's the best I could do. By the way, I think I'm original with that joke. That's why it's not so funny. No, I mean, really, being a physicist and a rabbi, to me, they're not mutually exclusive, and they're actually not completely segregated from each other. I don't turn my brain off to physics when I look at Judaism. I don't turn my brain off to Judaism when I look at physics. They actually have some synergy. So the abstract that I wrote for this is, can one be passionate simultaneously about both physics and Judaism? And for me, the answer is yes, you can be passionate about both. And I know we have an electrical engineer here, and we have other scientists in our midst. You cannot separate these two and be doing justice, I think. Or let's put it this way. I think you can actually gain something by leaving both dimensions present at the same time. So what are some of the topics where you can run into issues? Creation of the universe, evolution, the age of the universe. There's a lot of areas where it requires you to keep your physics brain on, let's just say your rational mind on, right? To keep that on, but engage with Judaism in an honest and open way. I don't think you have to reject Judaism by being a rational-minded scientist, nor do I think you have to absorb Judaism at face value with no questions asked. That just doesn't feel right to me. Physics and any, I would call it physical sciences, any discipline like that, trains you to ask questions. That's really what we do. We ask questions, and Judaism is not off limits of questions. Let's see. Let me just make sure that I'm touching on the important points that I wanted to wait. I mentioned Feynman, and I'll tell you why I mentioned Feynman. When I wanted to put something together about science and religion, or more specifically about physics and Judaism, I wanted to look and see what others had written on the subject. So I took kind of the big names in each field that I could find and found what they had written about the other, if you will. So I looked for what Feynman had to say about Judaism, and I looked for what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs had to say about physics, or the natural sciences, if you will. And I'm not trying to be arrogant here. I sort of think that neither one of them quite hit the ball, squarely, because they just didn't know intimately what the other field really was. And so much as I respected Richard Feynman as an outstanding physicist and a brilliant thinker and a real showman, let me tell you, I don't think he really knew Judaism well enough in his criticism of it. And to me, that's one of the sadnesses, that many rational thinking, people focused in the academic sciences, they reject Judaism because they think of Judaism as just an analog of Christianity or whatever our surrounding culture is. And they think that that's what Judaism is, so it must not make a lot of sense, so they just reject it. I am going to share with you some things from Feynman. And by the way, so Feynman taught freshman and sophomore physics in the early 1960s, long before I was at Caltech. It was an attempt to make the classes more interesting to people who came to Caltech all excited about science and physics in particular, and then they went through, mechanics and they got bored. And so they got Feynman to teach the freshman and sophomore physics lectures, just those 2 years, 1961, 62, and then 62, 63. They recorded those lectures, and those lectures became known as the Feynman Lectures on Physics. And it's a really incredible set of lectures. He kind of turned the teaching of undergraduate physics on its head. And not that it was easy, by the way, but he tried to make it interesting to people who showed up at Caltech and were all excited about science and had historically then gotten disillusioned. So he did that. And that was the only time he ever taught undergraduates, was just those 2 years. And that was long before I was there. So then I was a senior, 1974, 75. That year, he decided, maybe I'll teach senior quantum mechanics this year. So it's just like these two things happened to coincide. And he taught senior quantum mechanics, and I took a full year class from him. It was an unbelievable experience. I was so fortunate to have that happen. But what Feynman did in a lecture that he gave was to talk about the relation of science and religion. I'm just going to quote from this. Feynman said, "I do not believe that science can disprove the existence of God. I think that is impossible. And if it is impossible, is not a belief in science and in a God a consistent possibility? Yes, it is consistent. Despite the fact that I said that more than half of the scientists don't believe in God, many scientists do believe in both science and God in a perfectly consistent way." And he says, for the student, when he learns about science, there are two sources of difficulty in trying to weld science and religion together. The first difficulty is that it is imperative in science to doubt. And I think he's really right. You have to be a doubter to be a good scientist. It is absolutely necessary for progress in science to have uncertainty as a fundamental part of your inner nature. To make progress, we must remain modest and allow that we do not know. But see, that's true for me in Judaism also. But for him, I think he didn't understand that Judaism can accommodate that lack of certainty and belief, because we live in a culture where that's probably not the case for outside of Judaism. So anyway, he goes on to talk about, let's see, It is a great adventure to contemplate the universe beyond man, to think of what it means without man, as it was for the great part of its long history. And when this objective view is finally attained, and the mystery and majesty of matter are appreciated, to then turn the objective eye back on man is to sense an experience which is rarely described. It usually ends in laughter, delight in the futility of trying to understand. These scientific views end in awe and mystery, lost at the edge in uncertainty, but they appear to be so deep and so impressive that the theory that it is all arranged simply as a stage for God to watch man's struggle for good and evil seems to be inadequate. So I can understand that if you have a conception of God, and that's what so it's like the thing about somebody who says, I don't believe in God, and then you say, describe to me the God that you don't believe in. And that actually usually causes people to pause, because they obviously have some understanding of a view of God that they don't believe in. But that's not the only way to view God. I do want to quote a little bit from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and he has some interesting things to say too. He says, science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts things together to see what they mean. And really, that makes sense to me. Feynman also says, when we're faced with some choice of how to behave, physics can tell us what are the consequences if we behave this way, or what are the consequences if we behave this way. It can't tell you which is the right way to behave. And so Judaism, I think, gives us some guidance about what's the right thing to do. Not what would happen if we did that, but what's the right thing to do. And I think if we keep that in mind, there's much more harmony between Judaism and science than we might otherwise believe. And so if you came in here skeptic that you could ever harmonize Judaism and physics, I hope you leave at least with the feeling that there are ways to make these things compatible and that they can actually enhance your life if you strive to do that. So I'm happy to entertain questions and comments or whatever, but I hope that gave you a little flavor about how I ended up with this kind of joint situation of being a physicist and a rabbi. And if after today something comes up and you think, wow, I remember there was that guy who came to Cheyenne, I can tell you it's very easy to get in touch with me. My email address is physicsrabbi@gmail.com, and my website is www.physicsrabbi.com. So you will easily see how these two things can overlap. So thank you for your attention. Questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
When you watch the movie Oppenheimer, obviously the basis for it was science beyond construction, whatever project that you worked on, a little bit of the way you were thinking towards mankind.
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve, right? After Fukushima, so Fukushima, you probably remember, was a reactor in Japan that had a bad meltdown situation. The problem with Fukushima had to do with the cladding on fuel rods being reactive, and that when they got exposed to air, they then became flammable, and you had a big problem. So I led a team at Los Alamos to develop cladding that was fire resistant, basically. And Los Alamos is a wonderful laboratory for pulling together experts in many different disciplines to work collaboratively as a team. Academic institutions don't actually work so well that way, because most academic institutions, it's every professor for his or herself, whereas Los Alamos we work collaboratively on large, complicated projects because we're not competing with each other in the same way. And so I pulled a team together for that because I happen to be, and I know where the exits are, I happen to be a strong proponent of nuclear energy. And I think that without a solution to that problem, nuclear energy was somewhat imperiled. And it's my Judaism in some sense that informs my interest in providing energy to the masses. That's why I became a plasma physicist and worked in magnetic fusion, because I believe that energy is a commodity that we are blessed with in this country, but many people around the world do not have access to the energy that we have. And if we could make nuclear energy safe and affordable and widespread, I think we would be helping the world out. So I was committed to that project. I led that project, and we worked hard to develop claddings that were much safer than what was used at Fukushima. And I felt I was doing that for what seemed like the right ethical reasons, informed by my Judaism. I don't know if that quite answers the question, but that's what came to my mind. We can come back. So no, go ahead.
I was going to say, first, I appreciate that you were talking. You weren't slammed over the head with a lot of secular humanism. You mentioned your flexibility. Is that more for the substance or the mechanics of your Judaism?
It's probably both in the end. And let me give you an example. And almost any aspect of Judaism, I think I can do this, and I'll explain to you my approach. Let's start with kashrut. My wife and I happen to be vegetarian. Almost all kashrut issues disappear at that point, right? If you're vegetarian, there's really not much of an issue. But most people have some craving to eat meat. What's the problem with that? Just, you can eat meat, so what? The value in Judaism that is probably as supreme as any value you can come up with is human life. Human life is just really, really important. If we have to take a human life, it is a tragedy. And we spoke about that in our Torah discussion today. So we don't want to ever get into a complacent mentality about taking human life. How do we do that? We put barriers around it. So what's a barrier? We don't want to treat taking any animal life cavalierly. So how can we do that? Let's say only certain animals can be killed. Let's say that they have to be prepared a certain way. Let's say that they have to be slaughtered a certain way. Only certain parts of the animal can be used for food. Let's say that you can only eat that food with other foods, but not with every other food. All of these restrictions, these layered restrictions that may have originally been put in place for other reasons. Maybe they were put in place because people were getting trichinosis. Maybe they were put in place because it prevented Jews from eating with non-Jews. I don't know. But I know that I can change the meaning of those laws, if you will, to make them meaningful to me in a way that works. So it's flexidoxy in the sense that I can follow the tradition, but I can follow it in a way that kind of reinforces the ethical teachings that I want to reinforce. That's maybe not the best example. I'll give you one more example. Putting on tefillin. It's if ever there's a mitzvah that Chabad is trying to promote, it's putting on tefillin. I don't know how many of you have ever been approached and asked, did you put on tefillin today? The answer should be yes. But it should be yes because you put on the tefillin. I actually believe that putting on tefillin has value. Where did this come from? Maybe it was an amulet. Maybe who knows what it was, right? But the easy way to be progressive is to say it no longer has meaning today. Let's throw it out. The easy way to be traditional is to say, we always did it, we're gonna keep doing it. The hardest, but the most intellectually acceptable way for me is what I call the Flexodox approach. It's to take that tradition, but to make it meaningful to me. How do I do that? With the tefillin, as follows. We only do the tefillin 6 days of the week. We don't put on tefillin on Shabbat. Why? What distinguishes Shabbat from the other days? The other days, we're working. So what does it mean that we're working? We're either using our heads or we're using our body to do something productive. And we can do those things in an animalistic way, like by rote. This is what it says, I'm gonna do this, I think this is how we build this, I'm gonna build it. But if we elevate those things slightly, that we think that we're trying to do our work in a work day, where the thoughts that we have that we apply to our work, or the actions that we take with our body in our work, are elevated to the most good that we can do in the day, we can start the day off by reminding ourselves to do that. And one way to do that is to put on tefillin. One goes on the head, one goes on the arm. We do it, it doesn't take that long in the morning to do it. And now we've elevated our thinking and our actions that day, that work day, to be somewhat above what they would have been otherwise. To me, that's the Flexodox approach. We don't just do it, because that's what we're supposed to do. We don't throw it out because it's some old-fashioned thing, but we try to integrate it into a meaningful life for today. I don't know if that's a good answer. Yeah.
Do you have, one of the controversies that's going on in Wyoming right now is these mini reactors. They're trying to convince some of the smaller towns that disposal, that they use up the rods so much that the disposal is not quite as radioactive or whatever. What is your?
Yeah, I'm gonna slightly dodge the question because I don't know enough about it,
Okay.
but here's what I will tell you, and I'm quite passionate about this. In the 1960s, this country had a vigorous program in different kinds of reactors. Light water reactors, which is what are used ubiquitously, light water reactors worked, and we turned off research on every other kind of reactor. We turned off research on gas-cooled reactors, we turned off research on liquid sodium-cooled reactors, we turned off research on all sorts of different reactors, and we are paying a price for that today. Mini reactors are a Band-Aid fix, right? They are an engineering solution to the fact that we have not done the research on all the other kinds. Thorium cycle reactors. There's plenty of other ways to do nuclear fission reactors, and because we failed to invest in those research directions, we now pay a penalty for it. And so, there's probably a good answer to your question, but it's the wrong question in a way. And we're gonna have I won't be around, but turning off research comes at its own peril. I am a strong supporter that if you're doing research, a lot of stuff is not gonna work. That's the way research goes. And if you are not willing to put money into things that aren't gonna work, you're gonna pay a price down the road. So I don't know specifically about those, but I can tell you that they are just a Band-Aid because they're still light water reactors.
I don't think so, because they're trying to come to Wyoming and we don't have water.
No, but it's circulating. That's not an issue. I don't think that's the issue. I'm pretty sure they're still light water reactors.
Okay,
Yeah.
because like I said, it's not right in this area. I think it's.
In Gillette?
So, yeah, they're.
Which I only know now is a city in Wyoming because we looked up some things about Wyoming before we came here. But
Rob had a question.
I have two questions. The first one very short, the second one very serious, which may apply to others besides myself. The short question, when the physicist and rabbi walk into the bar, do the hematoma develop at the point of contact?
That's very good.
Second question, what do we do with people who enjoy their work so much that on Shabbos they become a clock watcher waiting for sundown so that they can go back to doing what they love to do?
You know, I'll give you an analogy. When somebody dies, we have a tradition that we call Shiva, sitting Shiva. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but it's actually a pun, right? Because Shiva can mean to be sitting, because we're supposed to be like really, sitting for 7 days, but it also is like the word for seven. So sitting Shiva means that you're kind of parked, sitting low to the ground for a week. Why a week? I think it's as follows. I knew people at the lab, a close relative dies, and the next day they're back at work. I think they have not done the grieving necessary to deal with what has just happened. I also know people who the rest of their life, they are grieving, they never come out of it. And Judaism is incredibly wise, and sitting Shiva to me is a perfect example, because if you park yourself for 7 days, when the end of those 7 days are up, you can't wait to get out of the house and get back into the world, which is what Judaism wants you to do. So frankly, if people get to the end of Shabbat and they're like, can't wait to get back to the world, that's great. Now they're going to go off into the world and be very productive once Shabbat ends. I think maybe for them, 25 hours is like perfect timing to really get them, going again. I don't know. Yeah. No.
You said you did not went to the rabbinic school. So how do you have the title rabbi?
Yeah, so like I say, it's what's called private smicha through Rabbi Gershon Winkler. He convened the Beit Din and did the pronouncement. So not unlike what you shared with me that I didn't have a chance to read because I was reading the book that Phyllis gave me, but the idea of lay conversions is not so dissimilar, right? The title of rabbi, I will tell you, historically we read in the Torah about Moses putting his hands on Joshua. That's where we get the word smicha, of putting his hands on Joshua and passing ordination to the next generation. And that's what was an unbroken chain until it broke. And it broke in the time of the Romans. And ever after that, it's just been, in my mind, a nice title.
So just for anyone who doesn't know, in different communities, there are different processes for becoming a rabbi. In many Orthodox communities, the path you went is actually the typical. That's also true of cantors. Uri Neal was here. His father was a cantor. This was passed on to him in his upbringing and through his father. It really is a modern invention. When I say modern, within the last couple hundred years. And it was really started in the Reform movement of having students go to a seminary. Prior to that, yes, there were students who went to academies, but it's still the process that went on of how they became a rabbi throughout most of Jewish history was because their ordination came from their main teacher and a Beit Din. And so that was the typical process. And what we now have are largely in the Western academies and in the major movements. That's a 5-year postgraduate program. part of that is the recognition that the role of rabbi in small town synagogues and shtetls is very different than what it was in large urban areas. And need for rabbis to have types of training such as counseling and pastoral care that might not have come through what was essentially apprenticeship. So having ordained rabbis through institutions is a modern invention that's been adopted. It started in the Reform movement, got adopted by conservative movement, modern Orthodoxy, Reconstructionists, and now other groups such as Aleph. We actually had a person studying through there. And then there's independent Jewish seminaries, such as the Academy for Jewish Religion, both on the East Coast and on the West Coast. We've had rabbis from both of those institutions. There's another process where a community can, and I think this is what
That's
you
what I
were
was
alluding to,
right?
can proclaim somebody in their midst to be their rabbi. This is what happened in Casper, by the way. And he's not ordained, hasn't been through any institutions, doesn't have a smitha, but his community proclaimed him to be their rabbi, so he's their rabbi. So there is no singular, literally, no orthodox way of becoming a rabbi, but rather there are heterodox, there are multiple paths.
If I can just pick up on what Jason said, because that was a very comprehensive answer. But let me just say, there are limitations by not having gone through one of those academic institutions. Not everybody necessarily recognizes my ordination. However, Jason mentioned Aleph. This is kind of the renewal movement, and I applied to the Aleph organization to be recognized as a rabbi in the professional organization called Ohala, and they reviewed my credentials, they reviewed my smicha, and I am a dues-paying member of Ohala, so that kind of gives me a little bit of credibility. And then building on that, my wife and I moved to New York in 2000, at the end of 2019. Very good timing. If you want to be in a pandemic situation, always go to the heart of the pandemic. No, so we lived in New York during a particularly difficult time. But while I was there, because I had gotten this private ordination and because I was now recognized by Ohala, I applied to be a member of the New York Board of Rabbis, and I sent all my paperwork into them, and they sent back my approval as a member of the New York Board of Rabbis. And I've maintained that too, even though we now move back to New Mexico, you can be an out-of-state member of the New York Board of Rabbis. So generally, it's not been a big problem for me to get recognized, and I keep those two professional memberships active. I just celebrated the 30th anniversary of my ordination through Rabbi Winkler. So for me, the real issue is that I've been doing it a long time, and I've learned the hard way, like making mistakes. So that's, hopefully I do better now.
So you can do conversions and weddings and everything. And
I have done all of the above.
be recognized by everything. So you're lucky guy. You got shortcut judge. And
That's correct. Yeah, no, that's true. I think getting the physics PhD would be a lot harder by the private PhD process. So I think I did it the right way. Look, 6.5 years of graduate school, that was enough. I really considered that I had paid my dues and I didn't want to do that anymore.
Just so you know, most Chabad rabbis to this day go through a process not unlike what he went through. You have a rabbi you study under, and you present to a beit din when that rabbi says, "You're right, it's time."
And they need to do the test.
Well, but that's what the beit din does. It's what I'm saying is that it's not a seminary per se, although they may have spent some time in a Chabad yeshiva. It is an apprenticeship program. It is not like what you have with either the mainstream Orthodox, conservative, Reform, or Reconstructionist movements, and now Aleph has essentially a seminary program where it's a mixture of self-study and then periodically convening group studies together over a period of years.
Noam, let me be honest with you. No rabbi can do everything. Even if they go through a seminary, they're not expert at everything. I read a wonderful article one time in the Jewish Catalog about a congregation that's looking for a young rabbi who can interact well with the kids, but is an old rabbi who can carry gravitas when he speaks from the pulpit, and who has a wonderful singing voice and can interact well with his interfaith colleagues and is an expert counselor. And I mean, you can't, nobody's gonna. Yeah, I found it. No, it's a joke article because people may say that's what we're looking for, but realistically, no rabbi can do all that. And I have some weaknesses. There's no question that there are areas that are not my expertise. And I have learned to tell people that's not my expertise. And I will give you an example. When somebody wants counseling, I will definitely listen to them. But the first thing I say is you should seek professional counseling, because I am not a professional counselor. I'm happy to listen to them, but and I have a friend who is a PhD professional counselor, and I have an agreement with her that if somebody comes to me, I can send them to her. So, there are limitations, but I went to this intensive program that I mentioned. One of our teachers at that program was a Reform rabbi who said that he had just gotten his smicha. He had his first job as a rabbi, and like a month into the job, somebody makes an appointment, comes to his office and says, "Rabbi, my life is falling apart. My wife says she wants a divorce." And the rabbi looked at him and he says, "What do you want me to do about that?" I mean, people are not trained to necessarily do that. And this guy said he went off to get a PhD in counseling because he realized he was going to be facing this, and they had not learned how to deal with this stuff as rabbis, that they learn other things. And so you can only know so much. That's the truth of the matter. Same with physics, though. I don't pretend to be a quantum mechanics expert. That didn't come up in class.
The thing in any profession, doctors, lawyers, whatever it is that you do, you know certain things. And you can't know it all.
Yeah, I'm a family medicine doc. You don't want me to try to do your cardiac catheterization. Trust me.
You don't want me to perform a Brit Milah, by the way. That would not be a good idea. But no, I mean, really, if a rabbi is telling you that they can do everything, they're probably not being honest. But it hasn't been a huge barrier in those 30 years. I really can't think of a situation that's come up where people have said, "We don't recognize your ordination," or, I mean, the weddings I have conducted seem like they're accepted by the states. Certainly funerals, you don't need a rabbi at all anyway.
Wedding, you're talking about Jewish wedding?
Yeah.
You don't need a rabbi for a Jewish wedding.
No, you just need to get it recognized by the state. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
So,
So I have a question. Have there been times where a congregant or somebody else has asked you a question that science seems to say one way, and you say something else, and you kind of like, I think it's early stage on NPR, but can you give us an example?
well, that list that came up there about the age of the universe. universe, right, is it maybe an example. That's such an easy one to work around. The Torah is really not trying to tell us how did the universe evolve from, the Big Bang or something. It's trying, I read it metaphorically, and I think, why is it that why do I have a personal library of 7,000 books, at least 7,000 books? One more now will have to get added, thanks to Phyllis. But why is it that we need all those books? Because people in Jewish text circles have been commenting on these texts for millennia. Why? Because we don't take the stuff literally. We look at it either, we have what's called pardes, right? You're familiar with this. We look at the Peshat. Right, we look at the Peshat and we try to understand what's the literal word saying, but we don't stop there. We look at Remez, we look at allegory, we look at Midrash, we look at what kind of ethical messages can we get. We look at the secret, hidden messages like Gematria that we played a little bit at lunchtime. And there are many, many ways to look at the text. We're not bound to look at it as if it is telling us like a science text. So I can't think of a great example off the top of my head where somebody says Judaism says this, but I don't know. This could get controversial. But I'll give you another example because this is a teaching from Rabbi Winkler. There's a text in Leviticus about homosexuality and prohibitions and all that. And Rabbi Winkler is pretty explicit in one of his books that this is referring to cult prostitution, and this has nothing to do with what we see in the 21st century as behaviors that many will say violate the Torah. So there's maybe an example where, again, a flexodox approach can accommodate something that at its face value or maybe at conventional readings may say that Judaism says this. So I don't know. I'd have to, it's a hard question. I'll have to think about that. But that was maybe an example of that. Yeah.
I've got a question. You mentioned, I've heard two sort of overarching principles of Judaism. Coming from science point of view, where there's like key principles that can be used to guide your knowledge and understanding equations. What have you come across in your studying of Judaism? They're like the top key thing, like you mentioned, sanctity of life.
Yeah.
And this process of like continuing learning and understanding.
I think this sanctity of human life is very deep. There is a teaching, very clear teaching, early on in the Torah that human beings are made in God's image. Now, we don't exactly know what that even means, right? But it means that every human being, and it doesn't mean Jewish human beings, it doesn't mean male human beings, it doesn't mean Caucasian human beings are made in God's image. And that means that when we look at a human being, there is a component of God that we are looking at. There's actually a beautiful teaching about this, and maybe we'll make this the end so that we can segue to Havdalah and then we can be informal. But one of the names of God is what we call the Tetragrammaton. It's the 4-letter name of God, and it has the letter Yud, and it has the letter Vav, and it has the letter Hey, and it has Hey, Vav, Hey, right? And so when we look at somebody's face, right, we see like their eye. It's small. It's maybe like a Yud, right? We see their nose. It's like a Vav. We see their cheek. It's maybe like a Hey. So we actually see the face of God in another human being, and we should not forget that that's who we're looking at. This is how we bring God into our lives. What do we mean by God? That we should talk about after Havdalah, because, I have very vague understanding of what the divine really is, except to tell you that from a physics perspective, when I realize that Maxwell's equations seem to apply everywhere in the universe. Billions of light years apart, electrons behave the same way, to bring your Rob's electron interest into the picture, right? They behave the same way. Is that not an incredible thing that gives us a feeling of awe? I mean, we should. So to me, again, I don't know what God means exactly, except that this idea that every human being is made in God's image is important. Also, we are monotheistic. So what does that mean? Even though we don't know exactly what God is, if we said that it's polytheism and there are multiple gods, now there's a pecking order, because if this person is made in God's image and that person's made in a different God's image, now we can start getting into some kind of game, right? So I think these are very important principles. Beyond that, probably other things sort of pale. All right.
So another well-known physicist, mathematician, I like to look at him, Albert Einstein. It attributed to him is a quote that says, "My sense of God is my sense of law in the universe."
I have an Einstein quote here, actually. And that is a beautiful one, but Einstein also said, if I can find it, let's see.
He told Bill Ford that God doesn't play dice.
Yes, that's true. I think, let's see, religion without science. Let's see if I can find that one. I'm a little, oh, here we go. Albert Einstein said it most famously: science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. So, that's a beautiful quote about how both of them play a role in our work.
Make it up how that was.
All right. I see that we've got some sleepy ones here. So it must be time for hug
I think what's, that's a good question.
Would you like to help with Havdalah? Yeah, because we're going to need somebody to hold something.
You need to hold the nails.
Okay.
Okay, Talia wants. Huh? Okay, I think it was.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I prevented people. I am so sorry. That's I owe everybody big time. I forgot that was the sequence here, that we were going to try to break up and have snacks before Havdalah. I apologize. I hope nobody holds that against me. I got a little flustered about that. Sorry. Well, Havdalah will be quick, I promise you, and then we will we'll have an opportunity to have some snacks. Who do we have here? Habib. You must be springtime. I knew it.
Her name is Talia.
Talia. I have a few friends whose names are Talia. And they're getting big. Talia,
What is the actual definition?
You do. Do you know how to do that? I bet you do. I heard that you're an expert at that.
And the end of the verse.
You want to hold the spices? You know what you're doing too.
What
do we do with the spices? Smell them. Very good. Very good. What do we do with the candles? We look at our fingers with the candles. That's what we do. We look to see how we can You don't have to look it up. We're actually, but we use the light from the candle to look at it too.
Oh my goodness.
How's that? My son is now 5'11". No, I don't think so. He can kick, he can kick. Not 12, 6 is very old.
No, that's not my son.
You're
That's
getting
Jack's
better.
son.
You know what? That's never gonna happen again. That's never gonna happen again. The only time it will be twice her age. You should enjoy that. And it's only gonna go down from there.
She gets it. But watching it's almost 30 years now.
Oh, okay, okay. I stand corrected. But it won't happen again.
That won't happen again.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's about the same time.
Talia, you're upside down. Or I'm upside down. One of us is upside down.
Am I okay? Are you
Wonderful.
interested?
We go get a hot dog and
You don't like, I was wondering. if I did this
You know what?
Yeah.
Mr. Bloomberg just brought out the spices.
go.
Something the spices.
Your first stuff like that. Brought it again.
Do you remember, is this the spices or is this the spices?
When I'm
Which
gonna
one
go
is it?
today.
That one, you are correct.
Yes.
That's gonna be the spices.
I'm from Florida and I couldn't see.
Let me move these out of the way so we don't
My ear was
have
like.
a problem with the candle.
Can't you do something with that here? Not to get more interested in that.
Oh, I don't know, I think there's some chocolate there.
Oh, there you go.
Not worried.
That's a good thing. My husband always said, you
Very funny. But I don't know who I met.
I have a friend.
you have a friend who doesn't like chocolate?
Yes.
Doesn't like chocolate.
Mary?
Yeah, I don't
They
trust.
do, but two.
You're the top dog.
Kitchen,
Where?
in the kitchen.
Where in the kitchen?
Other
Oh,
kind.
yeah.
Exactly. But I'm just. I'm very. It's, well, it's the second, she has 22 now. Do the same problem, and I keep saying it, she doesn't see it. Talk to you. To make his mind sound really.
Wow.
But his eyes are just like that's not.
All right. You have to speak. Ah, perfect. I think, Aviv said he is the candle man.
Are you the candle man, Avi?
Okay. And you're the spice person, right?
She is spicy.
Spices.
Okay. You get a hold of this.
It's like saying cheer them. No, they're comfy, but.
All right, I'm just gonna read one little paragraph to get us in the mood for
$1, please.
The day is departing with a quiet kiss. Remember that, Beverly. It lies open at your feet while you stand saying the blessings. You can't create anything yourself, but you can lead the day to its end and see clearly the smile of its going down. See how whole it all is, not diminished for a second, how you age with the days that keep dawning, how you bring your lived out day as a gift to eternity. And we started the day off with Modeh Ani Lefanecha, that it was a gift to be, to wake up this morning. And it's also a gift to watch the days go out and to move into the work week ahead. So we can go ahead and light the candle now. And Havdalah tries to invoke all of our spices. Noam, would you be willing to hold the juice? Oh, senses. All our senses, right. So we have the light from the candle that Aviv is holding. We have the sense of smell from the spices that Talia is holding. We have the taste of the juice that Noam is holding. We have the sound of us singing. We have the feel of the heat from the candle when we're going to hold our hands up towards that. So I think this is a very sensory experience. Yeah, la 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Ya la lai la la lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Ya la lai Ya la lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besamim borei minei besamim Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai That was hard. Ya la lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Ya la lai Ya la lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'eretz borei meorei ha'eretz Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Ya la lai Ya la lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Yai lai la 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 lai lai Ya la lai la la lai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lecho ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael la'amim ben yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yemei hamaseh Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lecho. Perfect timing, Talia. You can have a little drink first, Noam, and then you can put that out with the juice. Okay. Let's
So dunking. Dramatic.
Shavua Tov, 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 Shavua Tov. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Antishvi, Eliyahu, 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 Agiladi. Shavua Tov, I'm sorry I kept you from the snacks, but they're right here waiting for everybody.
Yes, there's very small pieces, but it's a molasses spice cake. And it is, I hope it tastes okay, but it was given to me by a patient last week who revived it from her mother's old recipes during the Depression.
Wow.
And so there is no eggs in it or anything else, just the basics that they could get in the Depression.
That's very interesting. Huh. That's very interesting.
No. No butter? No. So it's vegan.
Wow.
You can have it.
To go with the vegan bake is whipped cream made real cream.
Yeah. Straight whipped cream.
Plate's down here. Bye.
So would you like, you want a piece of this?
Oh, yes.
There's a lot there.
Italian, thank you for carrying the spices. Thank you for carrying the
Upside down. You gotta really shake the bottom.
Now that looks dangerous. That looks dangerous.
Nice. Beautiful. Oh, yeah, you want a little cake?
I think my parents would never. Because they wouldn't trust me. You did a good job.
How's it gonna go?
You're right, but there's some mistakes you probably don't want people to make.
Steph, are you still online?
Well, you're a chef, you know.
I sure am.
Okay, so I don't know.
too.
Rabbi, you want to talk to the folks online?
Sure. I hope you could hear okay.
I could hear fine.
Great. So
hear
wishing you
perfectly.
Shavua Tov. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you.
Yes. Shavua Tov, Rabbi.
Thank you. Did you get some sleep?
Yes, I did, honestly.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Hey, Stephanie, how you doing?
We didn't have too many people, but
Doing okay.
That's good.
I've been looking at the screen a lot today.
Oh, yeah, that's what I've been doing. I went to see everybody. I haven't seen everybody for a while.
I remember when
Yep.
before my
That's what Sunday's for.
Yeah.
Got one more day to go.
Yeah, one more day. Hey, when we get done, text me.
Okay.
All right.
I knew we're close. Somebody said to me, everything changes. I thought, why does everything change? Just by going from 1 to 2. He said, from now on, you'll never know who did it. Yeah, that's right, that's right. No blaming for that. We managed to get a lecture.
Oh, yes. One of the things
For me, it's only computer languages, but my wife is actually very good. She's
formidable.
So she's pretty good with Spanish. And then because I do this itinerary before we went to China, she's actually it helped because she was able to do I feel like the Warsaw she wanted to get too hard. I'm trying to think what other languages I'm probably missing, but
One thing I've discovered from watching a great deal of foreign language films is that all the friends speak.
Really?
Yes. So now at the point where I use them here to recognize. Reading is words are great.
It's just not.
So that's my, I know nobody who's fluent in French. Nobody talks.
Oh, no, Beverly,
practice.
she lived in Paris for a semester. And we got her French. I'll let her tell you.
Okay.
I don't want, yeah.
I also want to ask you another question. Because I do something, I got here a little bit later. I told you. Are you?
Yeah.
Well, my first 15 years
I'm not sure there's anything particularly interesting for folks online at this point.
Okay.
They're kind of talking among themselves. I assume the recording ended a while ago.
No, I had texted you on whether or not we could stop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.